think we just finished against Epicurus.
Hmm. That's right. Hello, everybody. Again, we're reading Epictetus's Discourses, and we're just deciding on working out what we all know, that we're at 1.24. How should we contend with difficulties? Sounds like a very Stoic theme, doesn't it? So we might as well just jump straight in. So let's see. It is difficulties that reveal what men amount to. And so whenever you're struck by a difficulty, remember that God, like a trainer in the gymnasium, has matched you against a tough young opponent. For what purpose, someone asks? So that you may become an Olympic victor, and that is something that can't be achieved without sweat. It seems to me that no one has had a difficulty that gives a better opportunity than the one you now have, if only you're willing to tackle it as an athlete tackles his young adversary. We're now sending you off to Rome as a spy, and no one sends a coward on such a mission. Someone who, if he hears the slightest rustle and sees a patch of shadows somewhere, will come rushing back in a panic to warn us that the enemy is already at hand. So too in the present case, if you should come back to us and say, the situation at Rome is desperate, death is a terrible thing, banishment is terrible, abuse is terrible, poverty is terrible, take to your heels, everyone, the enemy is at hand, we'll reply, be off with you, and address your prophecies to your own ears alone. Our one mistake was to send out someone like you to spy out the ground. Diogenes, who was sent out before us as a spy, has brought entirely different news. He says that death is no evil, since there is nothing dishonorable in it. He says that bad reputation is an empty noise made by madmen. And what reports this spy has brought to us about pain, pleasure, and poverty? Nakedness, he says, is preferable to any purple robe, and it is better to sleep on the bare ground than on the softest of couches. And as proof of his various claims, he offers his own courage, his imperturbability. Geez, I'm struggling tonight. Imperturbability, his freedom, and moreover, his gleaming, robust body. No enemy close at hand, he says. Peace prevails everywhere. How can that be, Diogenes? Just look at me, he replies. Have I been hit? Am I wounded? Have I fled from anyone? That is what a true spy should be. But as for you, you come back and tell us all kinds of nonsense. Won't you go away again and observe more accurately without giving way to cowardice? What should I do then? What do you do when you step ashore from a boat? You don't walk off with the rudder, do you? Or the oars? So what do you take? What belongs to you, your oil flask and your knapsack? So too, in the present case, if you remain mindful of what is your own, you won't ever lay claim to what belongs to another. He tells you, take off that senator's robe. Look, an equestrian robe. Take off that as well. Look, a plain toga. That too. Look, I'm naked. But you still make me feel envious. Then take my whole miserable body. If I can toss my body to this man, what further reason do I have to be afraid of him? But so-and-so won't make me his heir. What of it? Have I forgotten that none of these things is my own? In what sense, then, can we call them our own? In the sense that we say that of our bed in an inn? If the innkeeper leaves you the beds when he dies, well and good. But if he leaves them to someone else, they'll belong to him, and you'll have to look for another. And if you can't find a bed, you'll end up sleeping on the ground. Only be of good heart and snore away, remembering that it is among the wealthy among kings and tyrants that tragedies play out, and that no one who is poor has any role in a tragedy except as a member of the chorus. The kings begin in prosperity, hang the palace with garlands, but then, in around the third or fourth act, alas, Cathiron, why did you receive me? Slave, where are your crowns? Where is your diadem? Are your guards of no use to you? So henceforth, when you approach any of these great men, keep this in mind, that you're meeting a figure from tragedy, and no mere actor either, but Oedipus in person. But so-and-so is blessed by fortune to walk around with such a large retinue. Yes, and I too only have to mingle with the crowd to find myself walking with a large retinue. But this is the essential point. Remember that the door stands open. Don't be more cowardly than a young child, but just as children say, I won't play any longer, when the game no longer amuses you, or amuses them. You should say likewise, when things seem that way to you, I won't play any longer, and so depart. But if you stay, stop moaning. That's cool.
Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, it's an excellent passage, isn't it? I really like the spy image, which I'd forgotten about. I'd completely forgotten that. And it's kind of really, I think it's an excellent image because obviously everybody thinks they'd be a great secret agent, right? You know, everybody thinks they'd be good at extracting intelligence, but someone who is likely to panic is not going to be a good person for extracting intelligence. Someone who rushes around saying, oh, you know, the situation around is terrible, and there's death and banishment, poverty. Well, death and banishment and poverty are always with us. So someone who's going to lose their head in that kind of situation is not actually very good at interpreting a situation. They're just going to rush off with their first impression and panic. And really, that kind of person actually isn't much use, not just as a spy, but in any kind of productive endeavor. What you don't want is someone who loses their head at the first moment. So I think while it's an interesting image, it's also quite kind of widely applicable to
I think
people who...
I was going to say, I think people who get very overly excited by climate change, like modern prognosticators, act that way. They're forgetting it, and it's a fairly common thing. They're forgetting themselves. They're reacting anxiously to everything, and it makes them terrible predictors of the world because it doesn't invite courageous action.
Yeah, good point. And also, it's not that just that it doesn't invite courageous action, but there's also a bit of a crying wolf effect, right? You know, the more if someone rushes around saying the sky's falling in, people are just going to dismiss it because, you know, they've done that before. So yeah, I think there's a number of things going on around what's a sensible way to approach a situation, and I think Epictetus is pointing out some of the pitfalls.
Yeah, and maybe even more generally than climate change. The person who would make a good spy being the kind of person that doesn't lose their head easily, lose their cool. Well, life's like that. Life has plenty of cause to startle somebody who doesn't have a brave heart. So whether it's climate change or AI or germ warfare or just life or the housing crisis, you know, take your pick. But yeah, so yeah, I was wondering how the image actually works, but I think you're right, Judith. I think it's that idea that it's not necessarily that you're spying, but you need to have a sturdy character that doesn't you know, fall apart at every little threat kind of thing. But it was very reminiscent of Seneca, which is obviously no big surprise. That bit just prior to that, where you've kind of been selected to go on this kind of a mission. We see that kind of language in On Providence, pretty much exactly the same. Like this bit here, no one sends a coward on such a mission. I think in On Providence, it's like you've been selected to be one of the soldiers to watch watch the ramparts and do your job. Someone who, if he hears the slightest rustle and sees a patch of shadow somewhere, will come rushing back in a panic to warn us that the enemy is already at hand. It reminds me of that line in On Providence where he talks about instead of saying, oh, look at my bad luck for being chosen. Well, the great general doesn't choose the people who aren't good at their job. He chooses the best to scout out the enemy territory. So very similar kind of motive there.
Yeah, and then it's an interesting shift to Diogenes as a kind of role model. And he's kind of the anti of the panic person, the panic version. He brings his imperturbability, his freedom, and his gleaming, robust body, which is kind of interesting. And partly he's showing his body because he just doesn't have many clothes. He doesn't bother with that. And he says, have I been hit? Am I wounded? Have I fled from anyone? No, he's kind of embodying the Socratic ideal of the good person who's not harmed. He's standing there saying, well, I haven't been harmed. And then there's another shift to this perennial question of what it is that is actually ours, what it is that we actually own. Oh, there's Jody. Hi, Jody.
Sorry, I'm late.
No worries. Yeah, so we're at 124, Jody.
Thank you.
And so Epictetus, this person who's seeking for guidance asks what to do. Well, Epictetus reminds them of what they actually possess, which is very little. They don't own the gear that's attached to a boat or another transport. All that the passenger has, is their oil flask and their bag. Essentially, that's it. That's all you've got when you're traveling. It's just your bag, more or less. So
I like that. I like that idea of the oil flask, though, because Diogenes is famous for holding out the lantern, and when questioned, he says he's looking for a man. So I guess the oil is to make sure that you keep that lantern out in the dark. You keep looking forward.
I guess I was kind of thinking it was related to anointing. They used to rub it on their bodies, but maybe not. Let's see what the note says. I haven't read the note.
Oh, you might be right. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be the sunscreen kind of oil? The olive oil that you keep to stop yourself from being burnt if you're on a ship?
Well, I don't know. See, this is what we'll have to do some more research on this. But the main point is, of course, that we don't actually possess very much at all. All we have really is our body, more or less, and even that, is not of the essence. And then this, well, it's as if Arrian's put together a whole lot of different things in this section, because then we've got someone who's worried about not being given an inheritance by somebody or other who must be presumably towards the end of their life. So-and-so won't make me his heir. That's section 14. And so he's got some pretty stringent thing to say about hoping for inheritances. Is the innkeeper going to leave you the beds at the inn? Well, that's not very likely. And then a reminder about it's actually people who are well off who are more at risk of the kind of drama we see in the actual drama. So the heroes and heroines of drama are the very wealthy and powerful kings and queens. And by the third or fourth act, of course, they're going through a tragedy. So this is a stern reminder that however much we might want to be kings and queens in terms of their possessions and their comfort, the whole setup of tragedy reminds us that they're also subject to terrible events, and yet not necessarily an ideal way to live.
Yeah, we kind of touched on this last time, didn't we? That the famous person or the king or the tyrant is already sort of, from this perspective, disadvantaged to be a Stoic because of all that the external world seems to promise them, which obviously is always going to be unreliable from this particular point of view. And that's precisely what makes them the lead character in the tragedy every time it comes up in Epictetus, I think. It really kind of reminds us, or is trying to tell us, that the very average person is sort of ahead of the game a little bit, because they can concentrate on what's actually more important, which is what we all have in common, that which belongs to us.
I had a few questions on that. Do you think a lot of people's modern level of safety and the standard they're bought into now make them think that they should have that standard of external, like, material protection, and that they get, a lot of people invite themselves nowadays, when they don't live with privation, to a kind of tragic debt?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've talked about it many different times, about the history of marketing and the connection, consciously by advertisers between supposed libidinal needs, it was originally through psychoanalysis, and consumer products that could meet those particular needs. And as we've got used to that, they've found that once you produce a product, if there's not a suitable need to pair it with, you have to invent the need in order to match the product too. So people probably, if we take this theory seriously, have accumulated a whole bunch of apparent needs, psychical needs, that have merely been kind of invented over time and given to them, and help make them a kind of convenient consumer. I believe that. I mean, just looking around, I think that's definitely the case. Obviously, people have needs, but the Stoics are really saying, well, what are those needs really, and what is non-essential? And Diogenes is the poster child for that, because, like you say, he only needs his oil flask and his knapsack, and he probably doesn't even. He used to have a cup, remember? But then he saw a little kid drinking with his bare hands out of a trough, and so he threw his cup away in disgust. So he's even willing to reform his desires to that degree.
Yeah, it's fascinating how he's brought forward as the kind of the ideal here. But yeah, you're right. I totally agree with you, Courtney. I think I'm just thinking about this recently about needs. There's a lot of well, I mean, you know better than I. There's a lot of psychological theory around needs and what they are. And the Stoics would say, well, our needs are actually, and the Epicureans, to be actually honest as well, would say that our needs are actually very few and that they can easily be satisfied. When it comes to food and water and shelter, they're our bodily basic needs. And yeah, they're actually not that hard to satisfy at all. And if we are to make things easier for ourselves, in a sense, it's in our interest to minimize our needs and make them the ones that are easy to satisfy.
And also, more than that, if you go through that cognitive restructuring process to say to yourself that whatever I get is good enough for me, then it transforms the meager kind of stuff in the world into this kind of gift, that you've been given at every moment, the things that you can make good use of to satisfy the very basic needs that you have. And in doing so, it's a relationship that you have with the divine or with the cosmos. It's a kind of it's a minimalist life, but it's a pious life, and it's one that says yes to whatever you're given.
I think that reflects on the end, where if you don't get the inn, you'll sleep in a different bed, you'll sleep on the ground. You can change what you're contingent on and just pass through and just use the things that aren't yours as they're presented to you. And I think that gratitude and piousness also reflects on the beginning, that what I was thinking about this, it's like, well, how often do we sort of spit in the face of the situations that we have to wrestle with? You know, if we treat those things, which could be an opportunity to reveal ourselves and reveal growth, so poorly, so dismissively, then whatever, and they're often the best portal into genuine growth or genuine significance of yourself. Like, you're going to handle everything you're given worse than that.
Which is actually the point at the start of the discourse of that one, and also because he's talking about you've been paired with an athlete. Why? Well, you've been paired with someone who's going to make you in shape for the, make you Olympic class at your athleticism. And I think that's another theme in Seneca, right? About I don't want to be paired with somebody who's weak and easy to overcome. I want to be paired with somebody who's a challenge, somebody who's really going to give me a run for my money so that I can really develop my strength of character. Yeah.
Another thing that struck me about that athlete image, which we see in different forms, as you say, Courtney, in a number of places, including Seneca. If you think how an athlete, a genuine athlete, approaches their training, they approach it with humility and just to improve. And that's also an important reminder that, in a sense, when we're tackling the problems in our life, we're training for other events, all the events of our life. So it's good to think of that athlete image as someone who's, a good athlete doesn't approach the matchup arrogantly. They approach it with humility and a sense of respect for their opponent. And that's the way we should approach the challenges we face in our lives.
And this came up in our talk at the Brisbane Stoics last time we met, was that, a lot of modern Stoics think then they need to artificially create these challenges for themselves, like having a cold shower or doing these exercises or whatever. But the beauty of this shows the organic interaction with the world, in that the world is going to give you suitable challenges, and that's what you go out and meet. You don't have to manufacture stuff. And also it counsels people, which is obviously easily missed in the modern Stoic community, that they shouldn't try to say limit their environment to a set of kind of situations that they have mastery over and then practice stoicism on that limited environment, but rather drop that guard, and when they're in difficult situations, allow themselves to be thrust into the beyond the boundaries of their expertise into new environments. And that's how their self-mastery will develop. So it's about breaking dropping the need to be in control of your particular environmental parameters and allowing the world to come in and really give you a run for your money.
I just wanted to, before we move on to 25, in the final section of 20, it's a very famous passage, and it's one of those ones where Epictetus mentions the open door. Now, this is the controversial Stoic idea that if things get too difficult, you have the option of suicide. That's what Epictetus is referring to when he mentions the open door. And there's several places where he mentions it. So yeah, I guess, what do we think about this? Is this how we would think about it, or is this kind of still pretty countercultural for us?
It pops up a lot. Pops up in this Saturn party as well later. Sometimes it's an allegory and sometimes it's direct. I think it's, if you have ultimate choice over a lot of yourself, I think it makes sense.
that last statement, but if you stay, don't carp. So to me, that really is the crux of it, isn't it? You know, you're here, don't complain, because you do have an option to not be here. So don't complain, you know. Put up with it. Do your best.
It means you're choosing to be here.
Yes.
And more than that, I think fundamentally they're trying to constantly do this cognitive restructuring where you see the world as being given to you as a benevolent gift. Always look at this, look what I'm giving you, look what I'm giving you. Nothing I give is bad because you already have within you the power to make good use of it. So if you're moaning about it, if you want to kill yourself, you've totally missed the point of being alive. So it's up to you then.
Why would you leave the festival? Why would you leave it? You know,
If you could see it for what it was.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we do on the same theme? It's a couple of pages long. Who would like to read that one?
well, I'm happy to have a read. I haven't done much for a while. More on the same theme. Is that okay? I'll go on. If what we've been saying is true, and we aren't being ridiculous or merely pretending to believe that what is good or bad for us lies in the will, and that we are indifferent to everything else, then why do we continue to experience fear and anxiety? No one has power over our principles, and what other people do control, we don't care about. So what is your problem still? My problem is that I want specific instructions on how to act in line with these principles. What other orders do you need than those Zeus has given you already? He has given you what is your own, unrestricted and unrestrained. What is not yours, he has made restricted and restrained. What commandment then did you arrive with when he sent you here? Protect what belongs to you at all costs. Don't desire what belongs to another. Trustworthiness is your own, decency and a sense of shame. No one can take them from you or prevent you from using these qualities except yourself, which you do the moment you begin to care about what isn't yours, surrendering what is yours in the process. Tell me if you ever want to pull up anywhere here. 5. With such directions and commands from Zeus, what additional ones do you hope to get from me? Am I greater or more to be trusted? Keep his commandments and you won't need others. And as proof that he has delivered them to you, bring your preconceptions to bear. Bring the arguments of philosophers. Bring what you've often heard and often said yourself, what you've read and what you've practiced. Just how long should we apply these precepts that we have from God before breaking up the game? Just so long as the game remains a pleasure. At the Saturnalia, a king of the revels is chosen by chance, because this is the convention. Then our king hands out orders. Drink up, you there, mix the wine, you, sir, give us a song. You join the party, while you there get lost. And we play along with him, so that the game will not be spoilt on our account. But if the king says, imagine that you are unhappy, and I demur, who is going to force me? If, on the other hand, the program calls for the reenactment of Achilles' quarrel with Agamemnon, and the actor in the role of king says to me, go and get Briseis away from Achilles, I'll go. When he says, return, I'll return. The way we handle hypothetical arguments can also serve as a model for our behaviour. Let's assume that it is night time. Then is it day? No, because I've accepted the hypothesis that it is night. Let's assume in the manner of a game or play that you pretend to believe that it is night. Okay. Now believe that it really is night. That does not follow from the hypothesis. The same rules apply to life. Let's assume you've come upon hard times. Granted, then you are unfortunate. Yes. And suffering. Yes. Now believe that what has happened to you is bad. That does not follow from the hypothesis. Besides, there is another who won't let me.
I might stop.
Yeah,
Sorry, Jodie.
yeah,
It might be a good place to stop.
Yeah.
We've got different versions here, but I think that's probably a good place to take a pause, because there's a lot here.
Yeah.
There's a great deal in what you've just read. Thanks, Jodie.
Mm.
And I'm thinking it's quite. I thought I understood what Epictetus is getting at with this, but maybe I don't. But anyway, the first part I thought was it was kind of hilarious. Number 3, give me some specific instructions, because this is something that I see all the time in Facebook groups, Stoic Facebook groups, people saying, but what do they mean by this?
What should I do? What should I read?
It's like, oh, okay. And I do try to kind of to give assistance where I can. But ultimately, as Epictetus says, you do have to use your own judgment. You have to go away. You have to acquaint yourself with the material and do some reading, and then you have to make up your own mind. There's no two ways around it. And that's basically what he's saying there. And he stresses that in that process, you still have, you've got to have your self-respect, and that's what you've got to retain. You don't give yourself over to someone else to boss you around, or to treat you wrongly, really. I mean, if you let somebody treat you badly, well, that's your decision. You're in that situation. But then he goes into this thought experiment around the games, and as I say, that's the part I'm kind of thinking about is quite tricky. He sketches out the Saturnalia. There's a customary. It's like a situation where somebody's appointed as the king and can order people around, and so everybody plays along, right? Because it's a game. It's a make believe. It's fun. But then when it's not fun, is when it stops being fun. Maybe that's when to stop. At section 9, but as for you, suppose you're in the group of misfortune, that I don't accept. For who can compel me to suppose such a thing?
Yeah, this just is a continuation from the previous one, though. But here the metaphor is a party, or the Saturnalia. So the life is just like a role that we're playing. It's an act. And it's not a real king that's telling us to do these things. He's just a person dressed up as a king, which all kings are, apparently. And when someone tells you something bad's going along, well, you know better. That's not true. Just like he was saying about the spy in the previous one, like, well, you're just giving us false information, because that's not true, is it? That's how I see it.
Judith, in your one, does it say, but if the king says, imagine that you have misfortune, is that what yours for one? What's the wording there for you?
Yeah, it says, but as for you, suppose that you're in the grip of misfortune. That I don't accept. For who can compel me to suppose such a thing? So I guess he's underlining there that each of us has the power to go along with the game as long as we want to, and to stop going along with the game as long as we want to. But Sam,
because in that imagine that, you see, does yours use the word imagine? Imagine you are having a misfortune, or in the midst of misfortune. What does it say?
It says in the grip of, which sounds to me quite different.
But does it say imagine that you are in the grip of?
It says suppose that you're in the grip of misfortune.
Suppose you're in the grip of misfortune. See, that to me could, because my one says imagine that you're unhappy, is so completely different to suppose you are in the grip of misfortune, because one could just be a mental state, like imagine that you're unhappy, right? Well, be unhappy. Yeah, there might be some cause that you're unhappy, but you've allowed yourself to be unhappy. And then your translation says that you're in the grip of a misfortune. So more that the practical, real action has occurred. And then, you know what I'm saying? One's saying that, but imagine that
it's given as a demand. It's a command given by the king. So he's saying, do this, do that, mix the wine, drink this. Now I want you to imagine that you're having some misfortune happen to you.
That's right. And nobody can.
That's
yeah,
right.
Nobody can know what's going on in your head anyways. Well, sorry, that was my point.
Well, no, the person is able to say.
They can't know what's going on in your mind, can they?
It's not so much knowing what's going on in your mind. It's up to you. No one can make you undergo a misfortune. Yeah.
I wrote these 3 arguments like a piece of mathematics because they follow logic. In that, what's happening in this play of the Saturnalia, or this example to imagine that it's day, or this example to imagine that life is bad, is that in the same way that you write a piece of mathematics, which both of you have done in statistics, is that before everything, you have assumptions. So there's nothing they could do to force you to change your assumptions, your deep assumptions. They're priors before everything. So the circumstances can be changed, but you can't say, well, that means life is bad. And that was very explicit. It's like, you basically made a promise to Zeus that there's someone that wouldn't let me say that as well. I don't believe that, and there's someone that wouldn't let me. I couldn't play a game with Zeus to say all of life is good and to say, to follow you that this is bad. I can't accept your play as the ultimate assumption, or the assumptions that are way back, or prior to everything else. I wrote them down the list basically the same way that you write math down the pages, because I think they're arguments to do the same kind of things. They're slightly different because they're making it muddier, because they're opening up to life sometimes. But what are the things you can't change at the beginning? When they cross that, then you don't let it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Very, very good way to think about it.
And also the Stoics are well aware that society is one of the things that provides false impressions to us. So, it doesn't have to be a king, but the society in general is acting the role of the king. But like you say, Sam, you've got a prior principle, which is you're already free.
I'm happy to keep reading.
Yeah, go for it, Judith.
So did we get up to the end of 13?
We got up to, yes, the end of 13.
Okay. All right, so from 14. How long then should we obey such rules of conduct? As long as it continues to be profitable. That is to say, as long as I can preserve what is fitting and appropriate. Actually, that kind of clarifies some of the stuff going before. Some people are cantankerous and oversensitive and say, for my part, I can't bear to dine with such a man and put up with him recounting the story of his military exploits in misery day after day. I've told you, my dear fellow, how I made my way up to the top of the hill, but then I came under siege again. But another person will say, as for me, I'd rather have the dinner and listen to whatever chatter he cares to come up with. It is for you to judge between these different points of view. Only don't do anything with a heavy heart or a sense of affliction, thinking you're in a bad situation, for no one is forcing you to do that. Has someone made smoke in the house? If there isn't too much, I'll stay. If it's excessive, I'll leave the house. But one should remember this fact and keep it firmly in mind that the door stands open. But someone says, don't live in Nicopolis. I won't live there. Nor in Athens, nor there. Nor in Rome, not there. You must live in Gyara. I'll go and live there. But living in Gyara strikes me as being like living in a smoke-filled house. So I'll go away to a place that no one can prevent me from making my home, since it is a dwelling that is open to everyone. And beyond my final garment, that is to say, my poor body, no one has any power at all over me. That is why Demetrius, the cynic philosopher, said to Nero, you're threatening me with death, but nature threatens you with it. If I attach value to my poor body, I give myself up to slavery. If I attach value to my miserable possessions, I'm likewise a slave. But by doing so, I'm at once showing to my own detriment by what means I may be caught. Just as when the snake draws in its head, I say, strike at the part that it's trying to protect. you too should be aware that it is at the very point that you most want to protect that you'll be attacked by your master. If you keep all of this in mind, whom will you flatter any longer? Whom will you fear? But I want to sit where the senators do. Can't you see that you're merely crowding yourself in, creating aggravation for yourself? How else then can I get a proper view in the amphitheatre? And don't go to watch, man, and then you won't be exposing yourself to aggravation. Why create trouble for yourself? Or else wait a while until the show's over and then go and sit where the senators do and bask in the sun. But as a general rule, keep this in mind, that it is we who cause aggravation to ourselves. That is to say, it is our own judgments that aggravate us and crowd us in this way. What does it mean, for instance, to be abused? Go up to a stone and subject it to abuse. What effect will you produce? Well, then, if you listen like a stone, what will anyone who abuses you be able to achieve? But if he is able to use the weakness of the victim of his abuse as a handhold, then he can achieve something. Strip him. What do you mean, him? Take his cloak and strip that off. I've subjected you to insulting treatment. Much good may it do you. I'll just finish off. These are the principles that Socrates practiced, and that is why he always bore the same expression to his face. But we, for our part, want to study and practice anything other than to become unrestrained and free. The philosophers talk in paradoxes. And are there no paradoxes in the other arts? What is more paradoxical than to poke a lance into a man's eyes to restore his sight? If anyone mentioned that to someone who had no knowledge of medicine, wouldn't he laugh at the person who said it? Isn't it all surprising then, if in philosophy too, many things that are true seem paradoxical to the ignorant? That's a beautiful way to end the section.
Yeah. Do you poke lancets in your eye, do you? I'm not familiar with that form of biomedicine, but anyway.
Judith, which translation have you got that you use for this?
I think it's Robin Hard. Is this?
Oh, Hard. That's right. We're meant to be using Hard. Sorry, folks. I picked up the wrong book because I was running late. I meant to get Hard. Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah. I'll get Hard.
Lucky you're a lady, Jody.
I actually really liked it. I really liked this first section where I was reading, where he sketches the guy who's always talking about his military exploits and how some people just complain about that all the time and how they've got to listen to it. And other people say, look, I'm just happy to hear someone talking, you know. It's all in the attitude that you bring to these situations.
Which was the same as what you do with the wrestle, that opportunity.
Exactly. And it's so true, right? Because so often if you come to a situation or a person's conversation or something you're reading or whatever, if you come to it with an attitude that you can't be bothered and it's just all too tedious and not worth your time, you're likely to miss out on so many opportunities. I find this all the time. I always find something of use and value, I would say, in just about everything that I read, even if it's kind of not seemingly unrelated. There's always some, and that can apply to so many situations. There's all, and the conversation of people as well. You know, there's always something that is valuable in every situation, I guess, and that's what he's reminding us.
And it I was thinking about this recently. It's a bit like Diotima's ladder, this movement from the specific to the more general. So if you're with a disagreeable person, you're really honing in on the ultra specific surface level of what they're actually talking about. But if you start to move yourself along that ladder towards more general perspective of what's actually going on, it starts to get more interesting, because you're actually with a rational being who has the same sort of rational dignity that you have and the same sort of access to reason. And so there are more interesting aspects to being with other human beings than merely judging them for the surface level qualities of what they're talking about, for example. Oh, and I wanted to mention Demetrius. This is the same Demetrius, I presume, that gets brought up by Seneca on Providence several times.
Yeah, he's kind of always there and thereabouts. He comes up everywhere. He comes up in Philostratus, the Lives of the Sophists, and he's always. I think he was present at the death of one of the Stoic opposition to Nero, whether it was Thrasea or Herennius Priscus, one of them. But anyway, one of them, who was the person with him? Demetrius the Cynic. He was kind of always there and always, and he was just like he was a role model for Stoics as well as Cynics.
It'd be nice to have a collection of his sayings, because I was really impressed with the quotes that Seneca gives of Demetrius. I can't remember them offhand, but I remember they were quite striking on Providence.
I was going to quickly say, I've been liking, I know it's core, but I've been liking this phrasing that if I cherish my body, I make a slave for myself. If I cherish my property, I make a slave for myself. I think that also goes back to the wrestling and, dismissing those opportunities and belittling them, or how you handle them, how you reveal yourself. And that I think when you, especially in a modern attitude, if you try and possess the thing, it often possesses you. I think that flows back. I think that reciprocal relationship, how it shows you as a possessor, and then that's how you're trapped. I think that plays out often.
Yeah, definitely, I would say. And just going back to the boring guy talking about his war exploits, it also reminds us that, well, hang on, we might be that person. We might be the boring person. So what makes us think we're the really interesting conversationalist? Maybe we're the person that other people dread being next to at dinner. It reminds us that none of us is in the position to make those judgments, really.
Yeah, and we change all the time, right? Like, I can think back to when I was a bit younger, and now I kind of cringe and go, oh my God, I was so boring. I thought I was very interesting at the time. And I might, when I'm older, think the same thing about myself now. So there you go. Who wants to do what is the law of life? Are we up to that now, or are we still discussing?
I can. Again, this is the Robert Dobbin translation. 126. What is the law of life? When a person was reading the hypothetical arguments, Epictetus said, "This is a law concerning hypotheses, that we must accept what follows by way of conclusion. Even more cogent is the law of life, that obliges us to act in accordance with nature. If we mean to obey it in every area, on every occasion, clearly we must never allow what nature prescribes to escape us, and allow into our lives what runs contrary to nature." As in to not allow what runs contrary. So philosophers start us out with logic, since it's easier, reserving more problematic subjects for later. In the study of logic, there is nothing to distract us, whereas in practical matters, our attention is constantly pulled in other directions. Whoever insists on jumping right into practical matters risks making a fool of themselves, since it's not easy tackling harder subjects first. And this is the hard defense to use with parents upset with their children because they study philosophy. "Have it your way, father. My judgment is poor and I don't know what I should do." But if this can be neither learnt nor taught, then don't blame me for it. And if it can, however, then either teach it to me myself, or let me learn from someone who professes to know. Since I hope you don't suppose that what I'm doing, the wrong thing, is by choice, so what else could explain my error but ignorance? And wouldn't you rather I be cured of that? When did anger, however, ever teach someone to play music or pilot a ship? Do you imagine that your anger is going to help teach me the far more complex business of life? Jump in whenever anyone's ready. But the line of argument assumes that such actually is your motive for studying philosophy. Anyone learning logic and attending philosophy lectures to make a show of erudition at a dinner party is satisfied just to win the respect of some senator seated beside him. For that is where the important matters lie, and treasures there are accounted trifles here. Consequently, it is hard to be master of one's impressions in matters of ethics, where things that muddle the judgment are so many. I know of one man who cried, clinging to Epictetus' knees, saying how miserable he was now that he was down to his last million. And what did Epictetus say? Did he laugh at him, as you're laughing now? No, he was appalled and said, dear man, how did you keep silent up until now? How have you endured it? When Epictetus corrected the person reading the hypothetical arguments, and the person who had set the reading began ridiculing him, Epictetus said, you're laughing at yourself. You did not prepare the student properly to make sure he could understand these arguments, and still you use him as a reader? Well then, he said, if a mind doesn't have the aptitude to follow and judge a conjunctive argument, why do we assume it's capable of awarding praise, assigning blame, forming a judgment about things good and bad? If that person thinks ill of a person, will the other person care? If he admires someone, will that someone jump for joy? But in such minor matters of logic, you can't make an inference or draw a correct conclusion. This, then, is the beginning of philosophy, an awareness of one's own mental fitness. Consciousness of its weakness will keep you from tackling difficult subjects, and it is through some people strain at a pamphlet and still want to devour an entire treatise. Naturally, they can't digest it and get heartily sick of the whole business. They need to first figure out what is their capacity. In the realm of logic, it is easy to refute someone ignorant of a subject. But in the affairs of life, no one offers himself to be examined, and whoever presumes to examine us, we resent. And yet Socrates used to say that the unexamined life was not worth living.
Thanks, Sam. What an awesome section.
Yeah.
And I was actually reminded in the first section of when we read Aristophanes' Clouds. You know, you've got the young student going off to study with Socrates, and yeah, it actually gives us an interesting little sketch of the generation gap in ancient Rome. You go, the parents are angry to see their children go off to study philosophy, and the kids are saying, well, I don't know, if you can't teach me, then I'll go and listen to someone who can. And yeah, you can just hear the arguments at the dinner table.
It also brings to mind for me, I started reading for next Saturday night, the one by that Courtney you posted, the
Lucian.
Sorry. Yes.
Lucian, yeah.
Yes. And it's actually brought it up for me, what I've read so far in Lucian, because just because of the, you know, that striving, you know, for the typical student of philosophy is striving so hard to rise above ignorance, and yet, you know, it's such a difficult task, you know, and that was one of the arguments that they're using in that conversation, Lucian with the fellow, you know, that, oh, it's going to take me another 20 years to gain whatever it is, you know, because it's tough as it's just so tough. I fall back all the time, you know, and like before in the last section, you know, if you're not being challenged, it seems easy, but as soon as you're challenged, that's it, you know. I fall apart. It's all easy when nothing's happening.
So you've been paired with a worthy opponent recently, by the sounds of it.
It reminds me of what Courtney's been saying recently as well, to, he describes the same and opposite problem: to eat everything too big, eat with your eyes first, eat the whole thing, which is similar to Courtney saying you could just cram down on life and shrink everything down and act on this little part. Both of them escape acting organically to something you could naturally wrestle with, that could be yours and could treat well.
Yeah, that's right. It's also interesting, this topic of anger, because I reflect on it. I got young kids, and not saying I'm perfect, but my wife and I have very different parenting styles, and I find it easy not to get angry. And I think I'm coming at it a bit like what he's talking about here. Like, I understand my children are ignorant of things, and I say to them, like, sometimes they look at me completely perplexed, and I just say, well, it's to be expected. Your brain's developing. It's so small. You don't know these things, and you've had no experience. So take it easy, we'll go slow. We'll work it out together. You're not going to get in trouble. I know that you're not doing it because you're a bad person. You're just working things out as you go. And I find it helps to tell them that, because they're often overwhelmed. They're like, how come I can't meet my parents' expectations? How come I can't meet my teacher's expectations? What am I doing wrong? And that encourages bad behavior and outbursts. So you got to love them and just remind them that, no, you're just on your way. You're just a little kid. And I think we should say that to ourselves, and we should say that when we're dealing with people who are adults who are struggling with their situation. They might idealize being a philosopher, but we should just say to them, it's all right, Jody. You're just learning, You're making the best of a difficult situation, which is appropriate, But you've got some growing to do, but you'll get there in your own time. That's okay. You got support. We're here.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it comes back to this point around the athlete, it's a bit of humility. We've got to approach our learning with humility, and that we won't get across it all quickly. It takes time. It grows within us.
I think there's also like the Saturnalia. It's every level, all those levels are congenial parties to play the role in.
It was interesting how in section 13, when the student who'd been reading the hypothetical argument felt a bit embarrassed, and everyone was laughing by this stage. And Epictetus says, well, essentially, why are we laughing? We didn't give this student any directions. And this is the situation that we're always in, as Courtney points out. We're not, we react, and often in a social situation, we react in a way that's, again, dictated by society or the group of people that we're in, without really thinking through what's the right thing to judge. And this is, as he says, 15, this then is the first step in philosophy to become aware of the condition of one's ruling centre.
Would you mind, Judith, of just maybe retelling 15 and 16? Because I think the language is a little bit different in your translation, and I think I like it. I think it has different explanatory power.
Okay, so this is the hard translation, so 15. This then is the first step in philosophy, to become aware of the condition of one's ruling centre. But when a person comes to know that it is in a weak state, he will no longer wish to employ it on matters of importance. 16. But as things are, people who are incapable of swallowing down a small morsel go and buy a whole treatise and set out to devour it, with the result that they vomit it up or suffer from indigestion, and then come bowel upsets, diarrheas, and fevers. 17. They ought to have begun by considering whether they had the capacity. Yes, in matters of theory, it is easy to refute the ignorant, but in the affairs of life, no one willingly exposes himself to refutation, and we hate anyone who has refuted us. 18. But as Socrates used to say, the unexamined life isn't worth living. So that's what, and so that's how Epictetus brings the theory back to actual life, to remind us that Stoicism and the Hellenistic schools in general were not just around theory, they were about.
Yeah, and it's a very striking kind of idea, this, that we should tune in somehow and pay attention to our governing faculty and work out whether we use it correctly, whether it's in good shape or not. Like, that's a bit abstract. It's something I've thought about quite a bit, and I've got my own peculiar way of doing this. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone because it'll sound a bit weird, but I think it's really important. If you know then that ruling faculty, the faculty of judgment, whatever, that governing faculty is easily overwhelmed by impressions, then you should be very careful about the kind of impressions that you are routinely encountering. And we see this when we're doing drug addiction counseling, for example. I was doing it today. We create a relapse plan and we say, okay, what triggers are going to be really problematic for you? You need to have a plan for them. What am I going to do if someone in my family dies? What am I going to do if my dog dies? Is there something out there that's really going to throw you off your newfound sobriety? And they make a list, and then they have to make a plan about how they're going to get out of that situation or deal with that situation, because they know that they're not in the shape to face up to those particular things just yet, and they'd be foolish to not think about it. That's kind of the principle in counseling, and it's the same here. You're trying to do something. You're trying to build strength and capacity with these internal resources. Don't overstretch yourself at the beginning. Make sure you test them on simple things and get in the habit of using it, and knowing how to concentrate your attention here, on what's in here, your hegemonic, on your governing faculty. And every time you feel yourself reaching out to that, you almost have to ask yourself, does that belong to my governing faculty, or is this? And then bring yourself back, constantly bringing yourself back.
That's a really useful and a beautiful way to put it, Courtney. And I'm glad it's kind of in a form that you can use in that kind of clinical context.
It's better than the Cartesian self as well. Like, it's better than treating everything like it should be a machine or should be fixed. And when you're the subject of that as well, then you're often straining yourself and you're obfuscating the ruler part of yourself as well. You're not taking into account that what you're doing affects you to try and govern yourself by force. This is much more natural.
Yeah, it's very organic, isn't it? It just grows and develops rather than forcing things or trying to replace a broken cog with something else. Yeah. Who wants to read the next one?
I think we're back to you, Courtney.
All right, my dulcet tones. Here we go. It's called "In How Many Ways Do Impressions Arise, and What Should We Have at Hand to Help Us to Deal with Them?" Sounds like a fascinating topic. Okay, impressions come to us in 4 ways. Either things are and appear so to be, or else they are not, and do not appear to be, or else they are and do not appear to be, or else they are not and yet appear to be. Did I get that right? It is thus the task of an educated person to hit the mark in each case. Whatever difficulty may trouble us, we must bring forward the appropriate remedy to apply against it. If it is the sophisms of the Pyrrhonists and academics that trouble us, let us bring forward our remedies against them. If things have a specious appeal that makes them appear good when they're not, we must seek the remedy that is applicable in that area. If it is a habit that troubles us, we must endeavor to find a remedy to use against that, or it. What remedy can be found then to use against the habit? The contrary habit. You hear uneducated people saying, "Oh dear, the poor fellow's dead. His father's heartbroken and his mother too. He's been struck down before his time and in a foreign land." Listen to the opposing arguments. Pull yourself away from these expressions. Counter a habit by setting a contrary habit against it. Against sophistic arguments, we should apply logical reasoning, and again and train ourselves in such reasoning so as to become familiar with it. Against specious appearances, we should apply clear preconceptions, keeping them well polished and ready for use. When death appears to be an evil, we should have at hand this thought, that it is our duty to avoid evils, and yet death is something that is inescapable. So what can I do? Where can I flee to escape it? Let's say that I'm Sarpedon, son of Zeus, so that I may declare in the same noble spirit, "I set off with the desire either to distinguish myself in battle or to give someone else an opportunity to do so. For if I can't succeed in something myself, I shan't grudge another the honor of performing some noble deed." Granted that such nobility is beyond us, doesn't it fall within our power to accept this line of thought? And where can we go to escape from death? Point me to the place. Show me to what people I should go who lie beyond the reach of death. Show me a charm that is effective against it. Otherwise, what would you have me do? I can't escape death, but is it beyond my power to escape the fear of death? And must I die grieving and trembling? For this is the origin of passion, to wish for something that cannot come about. So if I can change external circumstances according to my wish, I change them. If not, I want to rip out the eyes of whoever is standing in my way. For such is human nature, we cannot bear to be deprived of the good, and cannot bear to fall into what is bad. And so in this end, when I can neither alter things nor rip out the eyes of the man who is standing in my way, I sit down and groan and hurl abuse where I can at Zeus and at the rest of the gods. For if they fail to take care of me, what are they to me? Yes, you'll fall into impiety. Can things get any worse for me than they already are? In brief, one must keep this point in mind, that unless piety and self-interest go hand in hand, piety cannot be safeguarded by anyone. Doesn't this line of argument seem conclusive? May a follower of Pyrrho or an academician? Oh, my reading's terrible. Step forward to oppose it? For my part, I have no leisure for such disputes, nor can I offer myself as an advocate of common sense. Even if I had a case to pursue about a bit of land, I would call in someone else to plead my cause. With what argument should I be satisfied then? With such as is appropriate to the matter in question. As to how sensation is produced, whether through a mind as a whole or just a part of it, I'm unable to defend one position rather than the other, and both perplex me. But that you and I are not one and the same person, that I know with full certainty. And how so? Why, when I want to swallow a piece of food, I never carry it to your mouth, but to my own. When I want to get some bread, I never pick up a broom, but go straight to the bread as though to a target. And do you yourselves, who deny the evidence of the senses, do anything different? Which of you, when he wants to go to a bathhouse, goes to a mill instead. Well then, shouldn't we devote every effort to defending this position or safeguarding common sense, while shoring ourselves up against the arguments that would seek to oppose it? And who says any different? But only one who has the capacity and the leisure should make this his concern. For as for one who trembles with fear, who is troubled, whose heart is broken within him, he should devote his time to something else. All right, well, that was a lot of sort of, I think there's a few attacks against the skeptics and things going on in there. Let's discuss that.
Yeah, it's an interesting passage. And right at the beginning, Epictetus gives these four alternatives as to how impressions come to us. So either things are and appear so to be, so that's a correct impression, or else they are not and do not appear to be. So that's well, that's not anything, because it's
still correct.
It's still correct. Yeah, but no one's deceived about it, because it's not
you
the
take
case.
it as the negative, yeah.
Take it as negative, yeah. Or else they are and they do not appear to be, so that's a false impression about something that is in fact the case but appears not to be. Or else they are not and yet appear to be, so that's also a false impression, where something is not the case but it appears to be the case. So
can I give a memory trick?
Go ahead.
The third and fourth ones are the same as type 1 and type 2 error in statistical analysis. To keep a bad impression, to reject a good impression or to keep a bad impression. And a way you can remember it is if you left someone that was really good for you, or you stayed in a relationship and didn't divorce someone 10 years earlier that you probably could have left.
Putting it right into a real world context. Yes.
Can you say that again? Oh, I missed that. Say it again.
So you can like lose, you can reject a real impression or a good impression, or you can keep a bad one. So when you lose a good one, you could like divorce the person that you probably should have been with your whole life, or someone that you really gel with, have a natural connection to, or you can keep the bad one. You can stay with someone and it's just rotten for like 25 years.
I did that. Sorry.
I'm trying to do that. No, but I see myself as paired with a good athlete, you see, so. But it's interesting, one of the skeptical arguments he gives here is as a solution, it seems. He says, when you have a habit, what do? You should use a habit against it, the opposite habit. I remember this from Therapy of Desire when we were talking, Martha Nussbaum talks about one of the exercises the skeptics had was that if you thought something was good, then you could just as equally think of something that was bad about it, or likewise, if it was bad, you could just as easily find something good in it, so and this is the argument that he sort of uses against habit here. So he's sort of using some of the arguments that might be used by the skeptics as a decent strategy, but then he goes out and rejects skepticism as a kind of a viable tradition, because he says right at the end, doesn't he, that, well, the skeptics would say you don't even know really for sure that I'm a separate person from you, because you can't know anything. And he's saying, well, you never stick the food in the wrong mouth, do you? Duh. And he kind of makes a point of saying, yeah, and even though you talk about it and have all these theories about it, you never act that way, do you? And again, that aligns with what the Stoics are saying about nature, that, well, nature causes us to act in a certain way, and it's up to us to kind of refine our understanding of what it means to live according to what we are, what our nature is.
Yeah, and so the skeptics are in the habit of calling these Stoics dogmatists, but and I think I don't actually think they would be likely to accept Epictetus's fairly crude presentation here of, well, which of you, when he wants to go to the bathhouse, goes to the mill instead? I mean, that's kind of a bit of a reductio ad absurdum of the skeptical position. I mean, I've got a lot of sympathy with it, but it's kind of crude. But I just want to head back to the issue around death in section 7 onwards. And when death appears to be an evil, we should have at hand this thought that it is our duty to avoid evils, and yet death is something that is inescapable. And he gives the image of Sarpedon, who is in the Iliad. He was the son of Zeus. And Zeus, I'm pretty sure from memory that Zeus intervenes because he doesn't want his son Sarpedon to be killed in the battle. So there's a lot of artwork showing Zeus getting Sarpedon removed from the battlefield. And so that leads to the thought, well, if we're such beings that we are subject to death, then where can we go to escape from death? There isn't anywhere that we can escape from death. It happens to every person in the world. And so at section 11, he points to the person who can either change external circumstances to what they want, or if not, they want to rip out the eyes of whoever's standing in the way. It's a very violent kind of image of someone who is so determined to bring about a certain outcome that they will attack with violence somebody who they think is standing in the way of that. And it is kind of a violent image of, on the other hand, unfortunately, that's something we see every day on our news screens is someone who has attacked somebody else violently because they think that person is standing in their way as to something that they want to achieve. So it's a violent image, but on the other hand, it's unfortunately an everyday image of people who are subject to violent passions. And then when someone, oh, sorry, I'll just finish the thought, Courtney. The person who, in the end, when I can neither alter things nor rip out the eyes of the man who's standing my way, I sit down and groan and hurl abuse where I can at Zeus and the rest of the gods. So ultimately, the person who doesn't take the violent option of attacking somebody that they imagine's in their way, but can't seem to get what they want, then they're just going to fall into despair and be ungrateful and attack the gods. So that's not a very good option either. Sorry, Courtney, go on.
No, you're right. And I think the motivational force that underpins all this is specifically or distinctly Platonic. It's this idea that we all have a conception of the good, and the good for us is exactly what we need to be doing. It's our idea of everything: appropriateness, fitness, goodness, rightness. It's that what must be done. So it's not just what we kind of hazily want to do, and if anything gets in the way of that, then we will do anything that we can to get it. And so that's why I always imagine those who have the clearest conception of the good are actually the most dangerous people, because they'll do whatever is required. They'll become a Hitler and just exterminate millions of people if they think that their idea of the good is on the money, because no one does anything evil willingly. They do it out of ignorance. The stronger that conception is, the more dangerous it is. And if they can't get their way, then it makes sense. And this is where I think I'm really interested in the connection psychologically. What if your most basic desires to reach out and grab that good that you can see is constantly thwarted, is constantly beyond your reach, is always blocked? Well, it leads to impiety. And really, in modern terms, that's depression. That's existential kind of angst. It's like, I can't live in a world where I can't be the hero of my own story. It's a tragedy of the soul. But he's really just saying it's the incorrect use of the power that one's already been given.
Yeah, that in that next paragraph, in following on from 14, yes, you'll fall into impiety. Can things get any worse for me than they already are? In brief, one must keep this point in mind, that unless piety and self-interest go hand in hand, piety cannot be safeguarded by anyone. Like, that's, yeah, that's what we have to guard against, isn't it? That idea that self-interest, we've got to be so careful about self-interest, and how does that link, or how is that part of our piety? It's not, is it?
Well, no, it is, because we must become the agent of the good. We have a preconception of the good, whatever it is, and we must be the worthy bearer of it. We must have it. And if we don't get it, we will kill people, or we will blame God, or do all sorts of terrible things. But if our preconception of the good, or our conception of good, lines up with actual natural preconceptions, then we are actually acting in our self-interest, truly and thoroughly. We're in accordance with nature, and we thrive because, we're making appropriate use of things.
Yeah.
You see that kind of you see that despondent youth all the time as well. Like, oh, I hate the band, I hate the older generation, I hate the system, everyone's given up on me. They'll spit in everything's faces because they feel like they haven't gotten that externalized thing given to them or conveyed to them. And they'll flip back and forth. They'll go back and forth to pretend to be powerful and take and this teenagers do it, everyone does it, to go on a warpath ruthlessly to try and get what they think they deserve, compared to, oh, maybe the fact that I'm not getting it means I'm worthless, so they'll just lay themselves flat. But they're externalizing it all.
Yeah, and I think I've been thinking about this a lot, about how important it must be that if you desire the good more than anything, that we're lovers of the good, and that we must become the worthy bearer of the good. I fantasize about what that means. It's really striking to me. We all must become the truly good agent, and that's why this is a recipe for flourishing or eudaimonic kind of life, because the one who truly grasps that knows how to use their governing faculty well and loses interest in trying to control or obsess over external things, knows that they are truly the bearer of the good. They are truly the good agent because they know how to use what was given to them by Zeus appropriately. And so they walk around with this satisfaction and pride and certainty and so on, because they are the hero. They're the truly good agent. They're in line with the cosmos, and the cosmos is good, so the good agent is the cosmic version of the whole.
You make it sound so simple.
Well, it kind of is, Jodie. That's the thing. It kind of is. As Marcus always says, keep it simple. It kind of is simple. It's profound, but it really is simple. You just got to do the right thing.
It doesn't sound very different to maturing. Like to have a teenager think that the world should be delivered to them, to have them grow up to be a mature agent, a mature person that takes that on themselves. Like people admire that when you see them, people come out of rough circumstances and have developed their character and they flourish wherever they go. Like,
Yeah, it is. And what it's picking up on, I think, is kind of this idea that when people focus on external things as sources of the good, they truncate their development. They're preventing themselves from relying on the governing part of themselves, which if they really put their attention on, they would develop this next layer of rational capacity, which you could call metacognitive ability. It's the ability to make use of reason, to think about thoughts, to reflect on things. That's a metacognitive function, and it's higher than merely surface level thinking and attachment to things.
Just on the theme of simplicity too, the more one allows external factors to influence one's idea of the good, well, literally, numerically, there are more factors in play, and so that's why actually numerically it makes sense to reduce them back to one, back to the one thing that you can actually control. The fewer variables there are, the less chance of failing or coming to grief there is, and the more variables there are, the more things that one places one's well-being in, the more chance of coming to grief there is.
And we could put a metacognitive spin on all of that too. Like, here's a good example. I was in parole the other day and I was doing the same thing that I'm doing. I was talking about, because I found a way to put this into practice with people who are struggling with addiction. And I said to the room of, people trying to straighten out their lives who are in trouble with the police, that, think of the things that are your good, the good in your life that will drive your behavior forward, that provides the motivation towards change. And because you're living a kind of balance between the change behavior and going backwards towards the old problematic behavior. So the good is that guiding principle that will keep you strong, keep your reasons for change going. And they give a list like, oh, I'm doing it for my children or whatever. And I'm like, so if you focused on your love for your children, then that will keep you safe from lapse. Would you agree? And they say, yeah, exactly. And then I can say to them, but what if someone takes your children away? Because that sometimes happens with children's services and that. And they go, oh yeah, I would totally lapse then. And I'm like, and I say to them, but what if your good was not precisely the fact that you had your children with you, but the good, in fact, was the quality of your love for your children? That can't be taken away from you under any circumstances. And they get that. They're like, you're right. It's not about whether they're there or not. I could be in prison. I could be doing something else. But my love for my children, which drives me forward, is the thing that can't be taken away from me. And they get that. And that's the kind of metacognitive quality we're talking about.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Courtney.
It is.
And I hope, it's great that and you're absolutely right. That is the thing. It's not just about whether the children or family members are there. It's around their love for them, which again is all that they can control, right? All that they have the power over is how they feel about their children and their love for them, and they're wanting them to flourish. That's a given. That's the only given here. So yeah, brilliant.
That 21, I don't know if I'm jumping too far ahead here. At that 21, it says, and who says any different, but only one who has the capacity and the leisure should make this his concern. As for one who trembles with fear, who is troubled, whose heart is broken within him, he should devote his time to something else. Can you explain that to me? I'm not quite sure the point there. Is he saying that someone who is really struggling should devote his time to something else?
Well, I mean, I don't know what everyone thinks, but I think this tends to reflect back to remember where we started today. The person who is given the job of being a spy and then runs off and then gets into a panic and comes back with a whole lot of kind of alarmist material and reactive mood. Maybe someone who's not very stable should not be rushing into philosophy. I think is probably the bottom line, and I think there's something in that. You know, I think philosophy does tend to get you questioning everything, and it should be transformative and fundamental. So you need a kind of a stable base, and someone who hasn't got that, or is a bit, or has is not really.
But isn't that the person who really needs it? That's where I think I'm a bit confused there. That's the person who really needs it. They're the one that needs the therapy. They're the ones that really need the change.
I take it as well, along the spy, that it also follows the person who would swallow the entire treatise too early, too quickly. You should take on organic opponents. You know, you don't set up a 15-year-old to wrestle the 28-year-old, like on their first day. Like maybe a 16-year-old will be the right opponent for them. It'll be a natural size, scale. Like, so you're going back to that earlier argument, maybe their problem specifically might be an organic opportunity for them, rather than having, not everyone has to walk the high valorized path of the philosopher. They could, like, someone else could still do this, but organically do it, you know, humbly, where they on the path that suits them, the one they've grown to.
Yeah, I look at this, I mean, I'm not looking at this directly, but it raises like a side issue for me, which I've struggled with personally, and I've sort of come to some sort of accommodation or whatever. I used to be really judgy when I was really in that zealot stage, I guess, where you think, oh, everyone should do this. No, if you're not into philosophy, then you're not worth talking to and you're stupid, basically. Like I had to go through that. Fortunately, it's a very ugly kind of thing, and I kind of, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm not reading this correctly, but I'd like to think that Epictetus is sort of saying not everyone can do this, or not everyone's made for this. You might jump into it and think it's for you, and you find out that it's not. You just don't have the capacity for it, and that's okay. And I've had to learn that for myself, that it's no good for me to be walking around judging people as if they were sort of like primitive human beings, because I'm somehow advanced because I've taken it on me to frame my good this way, even though the Stoics are saying it's better. On the other hand, that doesn't give us the right to, you know, this is the side issue. It doesn't give me the right to see somebody as less just because they don't have the capacity or the interest, the ability to see the good in the way that I do. They still have within them all of the characteristics of a rational soul that grant them by nature the dignity, you know, that I ought to afford them. So I'm kind of, do you see what I'm getting at there? I think, whether I'm right or wrong, that Epictetus is really saying that, you know, it's not for everyone, and it shouldn't be treated
I probably
that way.
meant it more from an idea of just feeling compassion. I think just feeling. I wasn't judging. I wasn't suggesting judgment of those people. I just meant that, wow, you know, like how sad for that situation to occur. You know, that's all. I'm powerless to know how to step in to change it for someone. I wouldn't be in a position to do that. But I can't help but feel that or wish or hope for them that there was some way that they might one day just wake up one morning and feel a little bit moved towards personal change or something. Not that I, you know, I couldn't make that happen for them, and nor would I judge them if they don't.
But it's a
But
good issue, isn't it? Because what if those people feel like that they get those needs met when they buy a new car, or yeah, because they do. Like you go and
Yeah,
look,
maybe.
and you notice they have a conception of the good, and it's quite simple. Often it's like that my kids are doing well at school, and that my family are impressed with my achievements, and I have a car. They haven't gone down that route that the Stoics are going, where they're saying, hey, that stuff's like problematic. Don't you know it's unreliable? They haven't done that. And that's what he's saying. They don't have the courage for that. They're not actively going after their ideas of the good and stripping them back and look and examining them to see how reliable and sturdy they are. That no, they're not interested in that. And is it appropriate for us then to be pointing that out to them and trying to pull their goods apart and say, by the way, your family who you're so worried about?
Well, Jodie, back to your point though, I think, and this is quite it's quite a sensitive point he's making right at the end of is it 21? And I think you're right to draw attention to it, because this is something again that comes up in Facebook groups, and sometimes like there'll be a new person in the group who says, you know, my partner's just left me and I'm desperate, what do I do? And his stoicism going to help me? And or you know, or I feel like ending my life or whatever. And people can be in a very, very bad place. And my instant impulse is to say, well, actually, yes, stoicism can help you. But perhaps better judging people say something like, maybe you need to go and seek therapy. You know, I think that's what, in a sense, that's the people Epictetus is talking about here. One who trembles with fear, one who is troubled, whose heart is broken within him. If someone's not actually functioning, they're probably not actually quite at the point where they can take advantage of philosophy. So there's a point at which somebody's not quite in the headspace for it. So that's what I think he's kind of gesturing to. And he kind of, unfortunately, what we want to know is, hey, Arrian, you didn't get the next sentence where he said what they should do. In a sense, we would love to know what the next sentence would have been. If the person who's really quite desperate is not the person who should be thinking about these things, what should that person be doing? I think we'd love to know that from Epictetus's point of view.
But that's, oh, sorry, Sam, you go.
Quickly going to say, I think it makes sense that the trembling person does not have the preconceptions that they're agents and sons of Zeus, that they have that rational capacity and that they're worthy of that and capable of it. Like that all of that's completely crushed them. Their original assumptions, their starting assumptions, whatever's behind everything that they're attempting to do is definitely not that, if they're presenting that way.
Yeah, totally. But also you just reflect on real life. What do people do? And I think that's what I would guess that's Epictetus is saying, that it's okay what they actually do. Like, for example, on the weekend I went camping and it was a men's group thing. And I don't agree with the philosophy necessarily, but those men find great succor in that approach. So maybe that's what he's sort of saying. Those men band together and they hug each other and they cry and they talk about how important it is to share their emotions. It's not a Stoic way of doing things. It doesn't give the same certainty and for flourishing that the Stoics emphasize. But on the other hand, it does give succor to the trembling, fearful heart. So there are other ways to skin it. Well, it's a totally different thing, but there are other ways to go about living in a world that you've concluded is a fearful place to be in, for example.
Yeah, well, it affords some basic security, doesn't it? And some relational security. And that's partly what some people in that situation are missing, or have somehow lost sight of, or have through, you know, a series of events lost in a practical sense. And you're right that that kind of environment, like a men's group, or a, you know, in my my gym, we've got a women's group who are kind of doing the same thing. You know, it's some of the kind of the messaging is is at its very best pop stoicism, but it affords security and it affords connection, and that's fundamental for people.
I was going to say maybe that's the progression of the arguments as well, that they took down the skeptics as, well, this isn't broadly applicable. Now they're almost self-reflecting that stoicism isn't for everyone or everyone's situation either.
Yeah, good point, Sam. Absolutely. I think that's right.
And I
Because,
think that,
yeah, I mean, I think, imagine if you were someone who wasn't in a good place, but who found themselves in Epictetus's classroom, right? For whatever reason, it'd be pretty confronting, and it wouldn't be for everyone. Some people would just walk out and say, oh, this is bullshit, you know, this is just stupid, and would feel confronted to the point where they didn't want to deal with it anymore.
totally. And I was going to say, if we finished with that one, I thought it would be a good place to wrap up.
Mm-hmm.
God, we're slow at reading books. We've spent about 300 hours discussing about 30 pages. I don't know, something like that. There you go. We'll give Dr. Sadler a run for his money. He did a sentence by sentence breakdown of the Enchiridion, so we'll be famous. All right, guys. Yeah, I
Thank
guess
you.
I'll catch you on Saturday, huh?
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Jodie. Thanks, Sam.
Thank
See
you,
you guys.
everyone.
See
Thank you
y'all.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful.